I'd like to look for a minute at the ways in which a child evidences having crashed against the rock. Because sometimes they're obvious, sometimes again they're subtle. One of the ways, of course, which shows itself immediately is in some kinds of conversions into the body, some illnesses. There's no doubt that there are many illnesses that are epidemic and infectious. But there are some illnesses, perhaps cancer, sometimes asthma, diabetes, some kinds of arthritis, and I don't know, perhaps even the possibility of taking in deeply even the infectious diseases, a certain weakness in the form. That makes one want to question why this child at this particular time is struck by a certain illness. Having worked now with some children with serious illness, I would really raise for all of our speculation about the relationship of these illnesses to some act of hitting a rock along in the journey. Some sensitivity in the child at some level to a crisis in the family, some sensitivity in the child to a distortion in a learning situation, some reaction in a very sensitive child. Very often it's a response to a larger political situation. I've had many children who were born actually after the dropping of the bomb, and you would see them play that out in certain aspects of their play, indicating a response to that huge life event, knowing at some level that it had changed the whole face of the universe in relationship to our potential capacity to destroy. And many of these children who are sensitive in the body are also very sensitive at many other levels, and usually so. They're sensitive at a psychological level, and they are sensitizers of many issues in the culture and in the family that are distortions of their natural growth. And being sensitizers that way, they are very often incredible children who are our antennae to say there's something wrong. There is really something wrong. This is the rock in our path that perhaps we can collectively move. And because they are such sensitizers, I have a sense that we should pay particularly attention, not just to the cure of the symptom, not just to the cure of the physical disease, which of course is essential that they can live in proper health and vitality, but also look at what issue it is that they have chosen to take responsibility for, to tell us something about. I remember a boy who had an illness and who made a little figure called the monster of the weather, who had antennae sticking out of his head. And he was this kind of child. He was sensitive to the tensions in the family. He was sensitive to injustices that he saw happen in the classroom. And he carried, therefore, this absolutely incredible desire to change life. But being small and not having the capacity to handle that kind of life change, it was transmuted into the body. And it was, in a sense, for him, the final cry. Again, there's something wrong. Pay attention, there's something wrong. So my feeling about these children very often is that they are extraordinary gifts to us, who very often are, many of us, and all of us at many times, are sleepy, comfortable, take life as it is, and don't carry that sensitivity to life conditions. And these children very often are such. They are, consequently, in my own image of it, the strong ones, not the weak ones. Sensitivity is a very interesting term. We often think of sensitivity as weakness, and you shouldn't be so sensitive, we hear a lot of time. As a matter of fact, it is in our nature to be sensitive. And these children who have their senses, if you take it in that sense, There's all five senses plus what we often call the extra senses, extrasensory perception. They sense far beyond their immediate environment frequently. These are natural senses, senses that belong to us in our inheritance, and these children still have them alive. And very often they are communicating to us as almost like litmus paper that there are some conditions, some rocks that need to be taken care of. So transmuting these sensitivities and the inability to live a natural life into the body is one form of hitting the rock. The other form, of course, is psychological. Damages to the psyche. Not damages so much as the psyche itself is hit, but responses of the psyche to the same issue. Things are not quite right. I'm not being able to live fully in the natural state. Probably if I were to describe the two ways in which this evidences itself in the most extreme form, and many variations in between, are those children who respond in terms of withdrawal. Autistic children, the most extreme case of this, in which they are withdrawing their energies from communication to the world. Usually very sensitive children, again, sometimes very bright children, who have no way to communicate out. They have withdrawn the energy in. The task is too much. Schizophrenic children, whose ego can't handle the incorporation of a tremendous life of fantasy in them, who are overwhelmed in their sensitivity to the inner life, and also very often in response to difficulties in the outer life, whose ego then is not strong enough to incorporate or integrate all of that, who are split off, in a sense, from a connection to the development of a relationship to the world. Again, very often sensitive, bright children who carry for us some sense of need for change. That's at the one extreme. Sometimes it's just a child that you may say is too quiet, stays in his room too much. Very often those are children who are just sitting there writing a poem. But if their withdrawal eventually takes them out of contact with life, then we might want to wonder what it is they're having to carry. Why do they have to keep this little secret place in them so alive that they have to shut off their total world, that they're in constant daydream and constant fantasy, and can't bring those out into life. Very often they're the ones who have made a choice somehow to keep that aspect of themselves alive, because in that place they may find a resolution to some of the difficulties they're having. At the other end of the spectrum are those children who do just the opposite. They act it all out. They are very often described as hyperactive. They're children who will be, who destroy who are violent in many ways, who also can't relate, who can't find a way to connect to peers, or throw tantrums of various kinds when they're young, are very destructive as they get older. Another way of saying something's wrong, I can't handle this, something has to be changed. The only way I know how to change it is to use my physical force, to shout, yell, kick, destroy. Something is wrong. And again, if we can keep the image of these cries, the cry of I have to retreat because I can't deal with what I'm feeling in a way that I can change the world, or I have to change the world by breaking it. We hear those as cries. Sometimes, actually, a situation that's very close to home in a family situation, or a misunderstanding that the child has about life. But very often at a much wider level, these children very often are picking up something much, much bigger in the culture that needs to be looked at, that needs to be changed. And if we could see them as gifts to us in that way and begin to try to see their message, what is it that they're responding to? What are the larger issues that they're trying to communicate to us about? They may not even know them consciously. We can't just go in and ask, hey, what is it that you have this illness for? That's where the adult mind and intuition is very important as we relate to these children, to take the time to look at them, to listen to them, to perhaps see some expression that they're giving to us, some metaphor that they're giving to us, and try to interpret that so that we can not just help them feel better, but begin to see them as initiators of change, of life change. These are two ways in which hitting the rocks become apparent in the body and in the psyche. There is a third way, which participates, I think, in both, but because of the emphasis in our culture of learning in a particular way, there are a whole group of children who have problems in the area of learning, what we call the learning disordered children, educationally handicapped children. This is another way in which hitting the rock without a capacity to deal with it displays itself. These are children who have difficulty in mastering the tools of this culture. That's again very subtle because, of course, there may be two issues. One is mastering the tools of the culture is an adaptive form, which I think we need to learn because it helps us to be part of the larger collective that we live in, as it is structured. However, among those children also are those who are gifted in expressing themselves in other ways than we have defined as learning. These are children who are often very gifted in other areas, and it's very important to discover where these gifts are for them because they may be balancing an attitude toward learning which is too narrow. And in spite of the fact that we call them educationally handicapped, they may be, in point of fact, gifted in areas which are very related to learning and to explanation of life and to understanding of life from another form. The arts, building, crafts. Very often these are children who do, in fact, balance their lack of ability to handle the ordinary ways of learning, arithmetic and reading, for instance, by very strong gifts in the other areas. And I've often wondered if just the very fact that their lack of ability in certain areas didn't give them the energy to balance not only their own learning, but to balance our whole attitude about what learning is about. So in some ways, these are like the other children who perhaps carry the sensitivity. They're carrying a task that's larger than sometimes they can handle in order to balance what life needs. That is, an expression of our understanding of life in other ways than the written form and the mathematical form, but expressions of it metaphorically, expressions of it in construction, in another kind of creation, which also explains life and understands life. So again, these children perhaps might look as though they had hit a rock, but as a matter of fact are telling us that the pathway is too narrow. Of course, it's difficult for children. It's difficult as it is for the ill child. One wants to make the body whole. It's difficult for the children who are carrying a psychological problem. We want them to be free, to be in life joyfully and in relationship. Also, it is true for these children who have learning difficulties defined by us as such. It is important in this culture because we use the written form as much as we do, that these children be helped to balance their life by the things they need to adapt in this culture, but not at the expense of gift, and not at the expense of the balance that they, I think, are trying to bring into life.